Hey guys, and welcome back to another one of my Cloak Dagger videos. Probably the last one this season. Might possibly end up posting one more like a bonus video, but nonetheless, probably my last one this season. So yeah, that makes this video my review of the 10th episode of the second season of Cloak Dagger, otherwise titled Level Up. But to get started over here, let me express my opinion on the episode by saying, what an episode. This episode was just amazing. A lot of good things, a lot of great things. I did prefer this season in general over the first season. My favorite episodes though happen to be this finale and the 8th episode of the season. But yeah, all in all a great season, a much better season than the first season of the series. But yeah though, there will be a lot of time at the end of this video to discuss opinions. However though, before I get started over here, let me remind you that on last week's review, we did discuss the Retching Pigs Easter egg, which was basically an Easter egg to Runaways. So I'm thinking here that Easter egg was really good, really solid, because it kind of leads into the ending of the finale of the season. Well, we are going to get eventually to that ending anyway, so without further ado, let's get started with the first event on this episode. So first and foremost, you've got a bunch of people in bee masks robbing a bank. That's basically all about the mayhem and chaos caused by whatever Andre did last week, which is basically all about the disappearing of a lot of people in the city. We know that's all part of his ascension to become a Loa, but nonetheless he needs an audience, and he's getting himself an audience. He's sending them to the lower dimension. Now this might be a little bit of a stretch, but a bunch of people in bee masks kind of makes you think a swarm of bees, even though a swarm of bees would be a little bit bigger, but nonetheless that kind of makes you think of Swarm. You know, Swarm in the comics, the comic book supervillain. Now I'm saying here that this possibly makes you think of Swarm, however though I'm also saying it is possibly an Easter egg, because when you put one and one together, Swarm did find, Los Angeles to be a good territory for him post the defeat of the Pride at the hands of the Runaways. So on the pages of the comics, after thinking that LA was there for the taking, Swarm ended up facing off with the Runaways, and Swarm ended up getting defeated at the hands of the Runaways. So what's going on over here is we've got an Easter egg last week to the Runaways, we've got something huge at the end of the episode that's got to do with the Runaways, gotta talk about that later, and we've also got the knowledge that Cloak and Dagger ended up being members of the Runaways at some point on the pages of the comics. So yeah, like I was trying to say earlier, putting one and one together, with the Easter egg last week, the ending of this episode, our knowledge that the Runaways and Cloak and Dagger are kind of tied together at some point on the pages of the comics. All of that put together kind of makes this a very possible Easter egg to Swarm, and possibly a hint that we're going to be seeing Swarm on the next season of either Runaways or that of C&D. But moving on though, it's not just the people that disappeared on last week's episode, not just a bunch of women that disappeared on last week's episode, but there's a lot more people are disappearing. A cop car crashes into a trash can right there without the cop in it. I mean, the cop was on his way to arrest these robbers, but nonetheless, he ended up disappearing. The same does apply to the driver of the getaway car of the swarm of bees. But this sort of scene though, this sort of moment makes me think of three things. Number one, it reminds me of the very first scene of the very first season of HBO's The Leftovers, which was basically about the disappearance of a significant portion of the population of Earth. The scenes with cars crashing into either one another or into other stuff on the streets, that's basically a very strong reminder of The Leftovers, because we do see that kind of scene on the series. Number two, we're given a parallel to Thanos. Whatever Andre is doing over here, it's kind of a parallel to what Thanos did with his snap. We wanted to see a post-snap universe on the TV series. We didn't get that. We're still not getting that at this moment, but nonetheless, we're getting something similar. This is what it would look like in a post-snap universe. But finally though, there is number three, telling us the magnitude of the situation. What Andre is doing is causing this as a first phase, and he's still gonna try to get more people to ascend to becoming a Loa. He's gonna play God like crazy. Kind of reminds you of what Chantel said a few episodes back. Right now, you're not a god, you're just playing God, and this is what you're doing. Imagine if you became a god. This guy over here is doing the worst that he can in order to become a god. Now, one of my favorite things about this series is they take a character, they take them a little bit further away from their comic book origins, they kind of Easter egg their comic book origins, but sometimes as well, and by sometimes I mean in the case of Mayhem, they bring them back to their comic book origins. They started off last season with giving us Brigid O'Reilly, which is basically comic book Brigid O'Reilly. Then they teased Mayhem at the end of the season. Then they gave us a split Mayhem versus Brigid O'Reilly this season, which is kind of different than what we get in the comics. But then now they're kind of unifying them. And at this moment, on this episode, she's working with Mina Hess in order to kind of bring the characters closer together. You know, the character on the series and the character on the pages of the comics. The scene though with Mina Hess kind of had a dual purpose. First and foremost, it was telling us that Mayhem is no longer just Mayhem, she's always gonna be both Mayhem and Brigid O'Reilly. It was also telling us that Mayhem at this moment was the dominant personality and was gonna be, for good, the dominant personality. So the rage is still there, it is the dominant trait for Mayhem. However though, all the other traits that she didn't have when she split away from Brigid, they are in there. They're not really the leading traits as they were with Brigid, but nonetheless they're still in there, just like the rage was in there when it comes to Brigid herself. But the second thing though, that was about a warning to Brigid, like hey, something is wrong, something is going on within this city, and you gotta figure it out or you gotta help with it. But someone though has been given all the power without any of the responsibility. That's definitely a play on the words with great power comes great responsibility, and that's basically a reference to Spider-Man, because Spider-Man is as well an integral part of the Cloak Dagger comics at some point. But Evita though seems to be so hot on references on this week's episode, she gives us another one, we need an emperor, but not the clothes. That's all a play on words and the name of the novel of Hans Christian Andersen, The Emperor's New Clothes. By using Cloak's cloak to open a portal, you know, to get to the lower dimension, to get to Andre and whatnot, all of that is about the ability of Cloak, his body on the pages of the comics, being a door himself, being a portal himself, his entire body, to the Dark Force dimension. But of course it's the Roxxon gas station as soon as they get into the Dark Force dimension, because that's the usual with this dimension, and that's the usual with every single episode. It's always going to be there, the abandoned Roxxon gas station, the Roxxon sign. It's kind of a mixed reminder. Yes, they have been beaten, and yes, they have been defeated, but nonetheless, they are still out there. Now there's all the talk as well about Tandy's knives, Tandy's swords. You know, they're not swords, they're not knives, they're daggers. That's all about giving Dagger, or giving Tandy, the title Dagger, her comic book title. Now as far as Easter eggs go, we've got the skull in the record shop. This skull is basically the Punisher skull, or something that looks very similar to it. And with us getting the Misty Knight Easter eggs before, the Luke Cage Easter egg on last week's episode, the Karen Page Easter egg on last week's episode, we could assume a couple of things, but most importantly, the one thing that we need to assume over here, or believe over here, is that this series, and for some reason, is trying to establish a connection with the Netflix series. Now the entire setup in the Dark Force dimension kind of makes it feel like, you know, Journey into Despair, whatever the name of the video game that they were playing on episode 8 was, that was basically training for this moment. I mean, there was a game right now, right here, that's all about them actually having to fight their way to get to despair, having to do all of it all over again to get to despair. So that's pretty much why they couldn't defeat Despair on episode 8, even though he was there at the very end of the game. That's all about the fact that they didn't level up. They didn't get to the point where they have defeated all their fears, all their worries, everything that kind of stops them and holds them back. So that's exactly what they do on this episode in order to be able to defeat Despair, defeat Andre. On another note, all of it kind of feels very much inspired by MMORPGs and other games, you know, where you have got to level in order to get more power, and when you level up, get more power, get more gear, that's when you're basically able to defeat the endgame boss. You see what I did there? Anyway, we do get to understand how all of these people are sitting there, not thinking, not talking, not even looking at Andre. They're just listening to the music. They're all seeing their worst fears, dealing with the worst fears, now including Tyrone and Tandy. For Tandy, it's her father. For Tyrone, it's a perfect version of himself. One that's not really perfect, but kind of perfect from the perspective of his mother. You know, let the Billy thing alone. You know, be a good kid, study for your lessons, all of that good stuff that Tyrone didn't listen to on season 1, and instead ended up where he is now, you know, accused of murder and whatnot. But their connection, though, is what's keeping them strong, what's keeping them sane, what's making them able to go on with the fight, because Tyrone, can you hear me? Tandy, I can hear you. They're calling each other's names, they can hear one another, they're strongly connected. That's one thing that this season has been trying to establish all along. A lot of people were like, oh, they're too weak, oh, we're not seeing them in action, but the season was kind of doing the right kind of build-up. telling us what makes these two tick and kind of giving them an understanding of what would make them win. That connection is what's gonna get them to level up and pretty much defeat the endgame boss. Now, Cop Tyrone, Tyrone changing from the good kid at home to the cop in the police station. That's basically about the two fears of Tyrone mixed together. Did I make my mom a killer? Did I do something wrong? Did I break up this family? Oh shit, Connors. Now, we've been getting a lot of zombie talk, a lot of zombie Easter eggs over the past few episodes. I've been talking about them repeatedly on each and every review video. And on this week's episode, we get the zombies attacking both Evita and Mayhem, trying to stop Evita from keeping the gate opened, the door open, the one through which Tyrone and Tandy would make it back, instead of being forever stuck in a world of despair. But seeing Fuchs though, that was very interesting. This is what makes Mayhem Mayhem and what makes Brigid Brigid. So Brigid on the outside, the weaker person on the outside, the more emotional person on the outside, would have suppressed her rage and definitely fallen for this trick by Fuchs. But on the other hand, Mayhem has still got the emotions, still got the feelings, but she does have the control over them. She's got the rage dominating, allowing her to deal with the situation, to get rid of Fuchs, to get rid of these zombies. Now, Tandy's dagger going all sword, the sword ending up giving us this mark on her father's shirt, the mark of Zorro. That's basically a reference to the mark of Zorro and the character of Zorro as well.
In a world where the most important thing in my life is an A, and the second is a B, I have a pretty good idea what I'm gonna file you under, Dad.
And where's that?
But they end up leveling up, as Tandy does mention on this episode. They end up defeating despair by the provision of hope, using that glowing hope that Tandy provides everyone. And that is basically all about defeating despair by bringing about the one thing that he tries to take away from people, an abundance of hope. But as far as Easter eggs and comic book references and parallels go, Tandy flying out of Tyrone's cloak to stab Andre, that was straight out of the pages of the comics. But as the episode comes to an end, 1. Tyrone is exonerated of the killing of Connors. 2. We know that Evita is taking all this Mambo stuff seriously, so yeah, Evita and Tyrone are no longer happening. What we've got now is Tyrone and Tandy, and the possibility of them happening. And there's been a couple of hints that this might be the way to go on future seasons. I mean, the way they look at one another at certain points during this episode kinda hinted that possibility. 3. Mama Johnson is not paying for the killing of Connors. 4. We get to see Andre's tomb, and even though he never ascended, even though he never became a full-on Loa, he's gonna be worshipped as one. Or it seems he's gonna be worshipped as one. 5. We seem to be getting Father Delgado from the comics, more towards Father Delgado from the comics. I mean, he's in a better place, he's in a better state as well. So yeah, he's improving, he's getting there, and this could possibly work in a Runaways kind of scenario with Cloak Dagger. But Tyrone and Tandy on a bus. Yes, they're not exactly on the run. I mean, he's exonerated, she's got no problem. It's not the same scenario as on the pages of the comics. But if you look at the setup, it kind of sounds like they're basically runaways, or part of a Runaways kind of setup. The other thing you need to look at over here is, leaving the city on a bus, all of that stuff. Not waiting for the trouble to come their way, but rather going, looking for it, trying to sort it out, trying to stop the bad guys from doing the bad things. And that's exactly what they're doing over here. That does not only fit with the Runaways kind of scenario, but also fits and happens to be an Easter egg to their comic book origin, finding the trouble and dealing with it. The other thing is all about the bunch of girls that washed up on the shore, and we know on Runaway Season 1, the Pride sacrificed a girl and her body washed up on the shore. With that being said though, my work here is done, so let me know in the comments down below what you thought of the finale of the season. Let me know if I missed any Easter eggs or references on this episode, and finally, let me know if you did like this video by dropping it a much appreciated like, subscribing to this channel, and enabling notifications to get updated whenever I upload a video, publish a new community post, or start a new live stream. But until the next time that you tune in for another one of my Marvel videos, thank you so much for tuning into this video, and have a great day.